The story begins in Lith Harbor City. Out in the open seas, a silhouette of a ship could be seen approaching. The ship docked at the harbor, and after getting off a man, Raymond excitedly exclaimed that he was finally here. He turned to a baddie who was using her assets to try and sell some potions to the passengers, and a fisherman who was trying to sell today's best catch. The harbor was bustling, adding to Raymond's excitement. As he observed the merchants who were trying to sell their products, one of his party members, a white-haired man, wrapped his hands around his shoulder, saying he didn't know he was this excited. Before Raymond could respond, another party member points out that the white-haired man, Walker, was just as excited as Raymond, but if he was being honest, he too wanted to run around from the joy of being here. This party member was named Taryn, and he looked up at the sophisticated building in front of them. Then, as they approached the building, he commented, "This is where our adventure begins. This is the era of adventures, where adventurers from all over the world embark on journeys to become heroes. Their adventures begin by challenging gates, a mysterious portal that began appearing all over the world. Beyond these gates were terrifying monsters that you could not see in the Maple world. Death is assured, but the countless valuable and powerful items inside the gates continue to lure in those who dare to dream big." Inside the building, Walker says to the others that they need bait. This confused Raymond and the others, and they all wondered what he meant. He explained that they couldn't plan for anything until they knew what was inside the gate. Countless adventurers have died because of unexpected variables, which is why they needed a slave to act as bait. Charlotte, the only female in the sausage party, agreed that they should have someone to take the monster's attention away from them in case of an emergency. A short while later, we see Walker and the others being welcomed to the slave market, which was run by the Gaffhor merchant group. The slave merchant boasted about his slaves, saying they provided the best slaves for using as bait, and he assured Walker wouldn't be disappointed with his purchase. He recommended 2 slaves who were brought in recently. The slaves were in better condition than the others, so they should serve as better baits. Walker decided to buy both slaves, and afterwards the slave merchant wished him and the others good luck on their adventures. Later, Walker and his party arrived at the gate. He decided to mark the pillar beside the gate to let other parties know that they were inside. It seemed like no one had gone inside the gate yet, which meant they were the first. He marked the pillar and turned to his party members, asking if they were ready. With smiles on their faces, they all entered the gate. As they stepped through the other side of the gate, Raymond stumbled. After getting his footing, he looked up and was left in awe as he marveled at the different plant life. The gate was completely different from what he was imagining. Walker told him to calm down as they needed to get moving. Gates are usually formed in locations far from monsters, so now is the perfect time for them to find somewhere safe to hide. Charlotte stepped forward, saying they should use this time to find an exit gate, as they couldn't leave with the same gate they entered with. As this went on, a monster stealthily dug up from the ground and attacked the unsuspecting Charlotte. The monster clamped down on the upper half of her body, sending the others into a panic. More and more monsters started digging up from the ground surrounding them. Walker activated a skill called Fire Arrow, and he fired it at the monster that was clamped down on Charlotte, freeing her. Then he hastily turned to the others and shouted for them to tie the slaves to a tree, as they needed to get out of here. As Raymond was tying the slaves to a tree, one of the slaves begged them not to do this, and to take them with. However, Taryn held the blade to the slave's neck, telling him to shut up and do as he's told. As the chaotic scene went on, Raymond began apologizing to the slaves profusely, and afterwards Walker and his party ran away, with Walker carrying Charlotte. The monsters quickly devoured one of the slaves, and we see the hand of a monster reaching for the neck of the other slave before the scene shifted to Walker and his party, who had gotten a distance away. They had to stop because of exhaustion, and as they caught their breath, Walker told the others that this was a failure. Furthermore, clearing the gate was no longer important. Raymond was having a panic attack. His breathing was out of control, and he was lost in thought. Walker shouted for him to get it together, but his words couldn't reach him. Taryn grabbed him by the scarf, exclaiming that he should listen to what Walker is saying. They might have failed this one, but he told Raymond not to give up hope, as they can always try again. He dropped Raymond on the ground, deluding himself that they can all make it out of here. But then he gets interrupted by the author, who's had enough of his talk no jutsu. A monster appeared behind him and crushed him. Seeing Terran's body crushed underneath the weight of the monster horrified Raymond. Walker dropped Charlotte, and he activated his fire arrow skill. The monster didn't take too kindly to this. It attacked Walker with its tongue before he could get the skill off, wrapping it around his neck and pulling him into its giant mouth. With Walker dealt with, Raymond awkwardly cowered away, begging for someone to help him. The monster seemed to be enjoying this. It approached him slowly and bit one of his legs. Raymond cried out, screaming in pain about his leg. In a tree, a person watched as Raymond was being toyed with by the monster. Raymond noticed this person observing him. It was one of the slaves they used for bait. Raymond expressed how glad he was that the slave was alive, and he asked for help. He commented that all his party members died, so it was just him and the slave. As he said this, he remembered that he was the one who tied the slaves up to the tree, and he apologized for it. Then he points out that there is no way a slave can get out of here alone, but together they might stand a chance. He begged the slave to help him, but the slave just stood there watching majestically. This annoyed Raymond. He shouted, "Don't just watch, help me, you bastard." Raymond, acting so desperately, put a smile on the slave's face. He dropped down from the tree, saying he doesn't know what to do as it was too late to help Raymond. Raymond quickly came to the realization that the slave wasn't going to save him. Tears began streaming down his face, and as the last of him was being devoured, he asked the slave if he thinks he can make it out of here. He comments that, after him, the slave is next. After devouring Raymond, the monster turned its attention to the slave. It buried its hind legs in the ground, and it charged at the slave at high speeds. The slave calmly stared at the monster, saying Raymond was wrong. He wouldn't die here. He put a hole in the monster's chest, and afterwards he fixed his hair, saying, "This isn't where he died." We then get a flashback, where we see a group of adventurers looking out at the destruction of the land from a cliff. One of the adventurers announced that something was coming, and in the distance, a horde of winged monsters led by the king of dragons, Gornthale, approached. A woman comments that the sight of the dragon must mean the centaur's nest has fallen, so there is nothing they can depend on now. As she approaches an adventurer who was standing on the edge of the cliff, she points out that the Signa's knights, the resistance, the cross-hunters, all the adventurers, and the 6 heroes who were seen as humanity's last hope must have all died. And the man she was approaching is the only one remaining, a man she referred to as El Pomme, the last adventurer. As the 3-headed dragon drew closer, the female adventurer told everyone to get ready, as this will likely be their final adventure. After the confrontation with the 3-headed dragon, wildfire spread throughout the land, painting a hellish landscape. The battle left Pomme on the verge of death. He knelt and grieved for his comrades, whose corpses were scattered around. He looked up at the head of the dragon which they managed to cut off, and he asked himself if this was the end. All their efforts proved to be meaningless as the 3-headed dragon flew overhead, and the head they sacrificed so much to cut off started regenerating. The dragon noticed Pomme below, and it dived to finish the job. Pomme closed his eyes, accepting that this is where his adventure ends. However, adrenaline started coursing through his veins. He struck the ground, signaling to the author that he is trying to draw on the power of friendship. All of his comrades, Philip, Jaden, and Alexis the baddie, all of them sacrificed themselves, so there's no way he can accept this. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Damn dragon! You're such an L-man. At least let me get some before you end humanity." With newfound determination, he poured all of his remaining power into a skill, but his body couldn't handle the influx of power, and he coughed up blood. Disrupting the skill, the dragon used its fire breath, and as he stared at his impending doom, Pomme self-reflected, thinking he is pathetic. He died wishing he was more powerful, but then he was scared awake by someone splashing him with a bucket of water. In his confusion, a person shouted at him, saying, pretending to be sick wouldn't work. This person continued to shout at him, but his voice was drowned out by Pomme's thoughts. His mind was racing with questions of what happened with Gornthale, and if he was alive. He quickly realized that he was in the slave market, but this only confused him further as the slave market was abolished long ago, but it definitely resembled the place in his memories. And if his memory serves him correctly, this person screaming at him was the merchant that was in charge 6 years ago when he was a slave. The merchant grew increasingly annoyed since Palm was ignoring him. He pulled back his fist and punched Palm. As the merchant's fist drew closer, Palm concluded that he must have returned to the past. After getting punished, Palm started wondering if he was dreaming, but everything was too realistic for it to be a dream. Plus, those punches definitely felt real. And as the merchant was showing them off to Walker and his party, Palm decided not to overthink things as this was the second chance he wanted. In the present, Palm picked up Walker's staff, which contained the skill fire arrow, a skill he noted wasn't bad. Furthermore, it's perfect for his skill level right now. But this still wasn't enough. He walked around glancing at Raymond's, Terran's, and Walker's corpse, hoping to find something other than a weapon. He noticed a foot. This got his hopes up as adventurers sometimes hide valuables in their shoes. He checked the boot and found a ring. He put the ring on and learnt that it was a telekinesis ring. His thoughts were then disrupted by the sounds of multiple footsteps in the distance. The other monsters had caught up, and Palm questioned if they were attracted to the smell of blood. The monsters surrounded him, preparing to jump him. One of the monsters rushed in, but Palm swiftly dealt with it. However, while he was distracted, another monster attacked with its tongue and grabbed hold of Palm's spear. Then it proceeded to crush it. This shocked Palm, and in his daze, a monster sneaked up on him. Palm activated the fire arrow skill, and he put a hole in the monster, and as the arrow headed for a tree, he decided to test out the ring. He swiped his hand to the side, and the arrow changed directions, piercing through most of the nearby monsters. But Palm couldn't keep this up, and the fire arrow quickly got extinguished. The other monsters didn't give him a moment to rest, and they charged in. Palm tried spamming the skill, but the author had spamming disabled. He jumped away, evading the monsters, and he notes that the skill must be on cooldown. As Palm was moving backwards, a monster attacked from his blind spot, thinking Palm wouldn't see it. After getting his footing, Palm smacked the monster with the staff, knocking it off course. Then, while the monster was still disoriented, he launched a barrage of strikes, and afterwards, he kicked the monster away. Then he glanced down at the staff, wondering how much longer he had to wait until the cooldown was done. Shortly after, he was able to activate the skill, but all of the monsters jumped at him. Palm remained calm. He let the skill loose, and he used the ring to pierce through all the remaining monsters. After the battle, Charlotte, who was on death's door, called out to him, saying, "There's no way he is a slave." Palm was taken aback, and he pondered how she was still alive. Charlotte added that she just saw Palm use spearmanship and magic, and she asked who he was. Palm guessed that she was still alive because she got lucky, or unlucky depending how you look at it. Charlotte points out Walker's staff and the mana ring on his wrist, which signaled that he had awakened. She shouted, asking how a mere slave was able to awaken. Then she looked around, saying all of this must have been his scheme. Palm stared at her intently, and he asked her if she was done talking. This confused Charlotte, and Palm apologized, saying she got it all wrong. He didn't plan this, but the outcome wouldn't have been different, even if he did, as he would have killed them all. Charlotte asked what kind of nonsense that is. Palm pointed the staff at her, and as he activated the fire arrow skill, he coldly told her that he absolutely abhors people who use slaves as bait. Afterwards, Palm left the gate, and his presence outside caused heads to turn. They were all in a daze because a slave coming back on their own from a gate is unprecedented. Palm walked hurriedly towards the adventurer registration building, ignoring the comments of the people. He didn't want to waste the second chance he was given, and the first step to avoid repeating the same fate in his previous life is to free himself. Inside an office of the Gafor Merchant Union building, one of the workers reported to a man named Abbas, informing him that a slave returned from a gate alive. Furthermore, he reported that the slave returned without a scratch on him. Abbas didn't see what the big deal was, as it wasn't unlikely for someone meant to be bait to return safe and sound. The worker agreed that it's not unlikely, however, all of the adventurers accompanying the slave died inside the gate. Abbas tapped his cigar above the ashtray, asking the worker if he was trying to say the slave was the only one who made it out alive. He comments that this situation is definitely unusual, and he points out that it's even stranger that the slave returned on his own 2 feet, as people who have been reduced to slaves because of debt will always end up as bait again, even if they come back alive. And despite knowing this, the slave chose not to run away, which must mean that the slave is aware he can't get out of their hold that easily, as the only way to escape their hold is through death. This was the way of the Gafor Merchant Union. Because of this, Abbas still didn't think this was something worth reporting, and he asked the worker why he was reporting about such a trivial matter. The worker says he had something else to report about. He told Abbas that the slave unlocked the first circle. This shocked Abbas. He found it hard to believe that a slave who was used as bait is now a one circle. But if it was true, then the slave will likely harbor negative sentiments towards the merchant union. And Abbas started planning, in case the slave has plans for revenge. The worker added that the slave was asking for a change in contract. It seemed like he wanted to register as an adventurer. This added to Abbas's shock. He seemed to want to say something in response, but he was rendered speechless. After gathering himself, he comments that there is no way a slave can work in this place. The worker interjected, saying this was an order from Mr. Rakan, who personally ordered for Abbas to look into this matter. Abbas was overwhelmed with his emotions. He slammed his hands on the table and shouted Mr. Rakan's name. He couldn't understand why an executive of the Gafor Merchant Group Union is showing interest in a lowly slave. He thought about why Mr. Rakan would do something like this, and something came to mind, however he didn't want to accept it. The worker left the room, and Abbas was left pondering about the slave who wants to become an adventurer. Under Queen Cygnus, the status of slave shall not exist, but that is a whole lot of yap. Humans have always been slaves to Mezzo, this world's currency. If a person fails to pay back what they owe to Daddy IRS, they will have to make up for it through labor. This notion was created by the Maple world's so-called slaves, and one day our protagonist's only family collapsed after getting a deadly illness, and he became a slave. He purchased a herb called black moss from the Gafor Merchant Union on credit to try and heal his father's illness. But the merchant played him for a fool by setting the price for the black moss at multiple times its current price. His father couldn't pay for it, so he was brought in front of a jury and was sentenced to labor equivalent to the amount he borrowed for the black moss. Thus, he spent 6 years in his previous life being exploited, but in this life, he can have his revenge. The scene then shifts to Abbas and Palm meeting over tea. Palm recognized Abbas, who he knows from his previous life that he is the right-hand man of Rakan, one of the first executives of the union, and he notes that he caught a big fish. He introduced himself, but Abbas stopped him, making it clear that he already knows Palm's name. He informed him that he already received the reports about him, so they can skip the small talk. He placed his cup of tea down, and without hesitation, he told Palm that he will change his contact into one for F-rank adventurers. Palm was taken aback that Abbas accepted his demands so easily. He notes that just as he expected, Abbas was being cautious of that. However, he had no intentions of playing along at their pace. He thanked Abbas, but he told him with a smile that he wants the contract changed to ones for E-rank adventurers. Abbas asked why they would do that when the Adventurers Association hasn't even assigned him a rank yet, and Palm made his case, saying he already explored over 100 of gates in the past 3 years as a baiting slave. Abbas points out that the experience of a bait is different from that of an adventurer, as a slave would have never killed a monster before. But Palm disagreed, and he asked, since when has monster hunting been a virtue for an adventurer? This question confused Abbas, and Palm went on to say the reason the first adventurer was able to make a name for himself was survival, and he reminded Abbas of the true virtue of an adventurer, which is to return alive. Abbas admitted that what Palm is saying is true, and that surviving as a bait slave for 3 years is no ordinary feat. But that's all it is. Plus, Palm has only been entering low-ranking gates. He asked him if he really thinks that his pathetic survival ability will work in higher-ranking gates, and if he thinks so, Palm must think he is an idiot who will offer a risky contract to someone who'll die without even having to pay the amount they owe. Palm went silent, and in his head, Abbas called him a lunatic. He thought that the fact Palm was acting all that will cause him to die without going far at all. But as he thought this, he couldn't shake the repulsive feeling he was getting. He recalled a gate with 12 scars that only 5 people can enter. He chuckled, and he told Palm of a gate where the bones of at least 12 parties are buried. He asked Palm to prove himself. He showed him the contract, saying if he does, then he will gladly change the terms. The next day, Palm met up with the adventurers whose party he would be joining for the raid. The leader, Shev, introduced himself saying his position is in the front lines as a tank. From the information they got from Abyss, they knew Palm was a slave. However, Shev assured him he has nothing to worry about as he and his party members don't care about things like that. Palm says he hopes they can have a nice time working together. Shev interjected, saying he heard Palm can use fire magic. Palm confirmed that he could, not making a big deal out of it, but Shev and his comrades were pleasantly surprised. One of them, a man with white hair, asked him if his elemental magic he can use was already decided, and Shev says he heard mages can't use magic of elements other than the one they're born with. He glanced over at the white-haired man, saying any item that's unrelated to their element is useless for a mage. The white-haired man comments that must get complicated. With the introductions and familiarization out of the way, it was time to focus on the mission. Shev comments that Palm must have gotten the details from Abyss, but he decided to explain the mission anyway. The goal of this mission is to safely retrieve the item left behind by the 12 parties who were annihilated before them and return those items to the Union. Furthermore, Shev informed the party that he heard the Union was giving 3,000 meso for each item. The white-haired man complained, saying the Union was doing too much as they wouldn't be able to gain anything from this adventure if they can't retrieve the items. One of the other party members told the white-haired man to stop complaining. The white-haired man responded saying he wasn't complaining, and to stop things from escalating, Shev intervened. Afterwards, he turned their attention to the gate asking if they were ready to make some money. They entered the gate, and inside, the white-haired man pointed out the landscape, which was bright and dreary at the same time. Shev got everyone's attention, and he explained that there is a high chance of a long battle occurring in this dense forest, so he wanted them to set up a base first. One of the party members suggested they set up base on a giant tree, because with the tree branches hiding and moving to another tree will be quite easy. Shev thought this wasn't a bad plan, and he decided to go with it. They dropped the necessary materials on the ground, and Palm approached to help, but the white-haired man stopped him, saying he can rest as setting up base was his and another party member, who was already looking at the materials job. Later, after the base was set up, Shev wanted them to split in 2 groups and search the surroundings. Team 1 was the white-haired man Tom, Max, and Roa, while Team 2 was Shev and Palm. After splitting the group into teams, Shev laid out the plan. Each team will take either the east or west side to scout and report back, and if something were to happen, they would send a signal and rush to the base. With the plan laid out, they all set off. After some time searching, Shev started growing increasingly worried. He felt like something was off, as he and Palm didn't find a single monster, let alone an item. Because of this, Shev planned to have them move further inside tomorrow. He momentarily set his concerns aside and asked Palm how he found his first mission as an adventurer. Palm was slightly taken aback. He responded saying he feels nervous. Shev tried to comfort him, saying that's how it is when you start out. He told Palm that he's been an adventurer for a long time, yet every time he steps inside a gate, he gets nervous. He chuckled, saying he's always been a scaredy cat. But despite that, he finds courage in the fact that good people are by his side. He knows saying that is glazing his own comrades, but he couldn't help it since they're really good people. He continued on, saying he felt very sorry for Palm when he heard his story, as he could only imagine how hard it must have been. And since they were on the topic, he turned to him saying he would like to reach him about his car's extended warranty. Just kidding. He asked Palm if he would like to join his party. Palm showed discernment, so Shev dropped it, saying he shouldn't think too much about it since he wasn't being serious. Later that night, the group sat around a campfire in their base, eating and discussing how they weren't able to find any monsters. Shev told them to stop talking about work when they're eating, and to discuss this tomorrow. Palm quietly observed the party, drinking the drink that was given to him. Later that night, there was movement up on their base. With a torch in hand, Shev and the others called out to the sleeping Palm, asking if he was sleeping. There was no response. Shev froze for a moment, cautiously watching the sleeping bag for any movements. Tom placed his hands on Shev's shoulder, asking him why he was being so cautious. The expression on their faces swiftly shifted to a twisted one, and Tom comments that Palm is probably lost in his dreams, so there's no way he can hear them. Tom approached the sleeping bag, asking if Chev had forgotten that they mixed in a sleeping herb that can put mushmom weighing hundreds of kilograms to sleep in the food and drink served to Palm, and Palm drank so much that he was wondering if he wasn't already dead. After getting closer to the sleeping bag, Tom knelt down and lifted his dagger in the air, asking if they should get started. He stabbed the sleeping bag, but quickly noticed that something was wrong. He pulled back the sleeping bag, revealing pillows tied to a log. This revelation shocked the others. In a panic, Chev turned shouting for them to find Palm, but suddenly the base erupted and the flames started to spread. A silhouette watched on as Chev and his party scurried around in a panic. Some of them quickly checked up on their rations, and Chev looked around questioning if this was Palm's doing. As this went on, Max pointed Chev's attention to the giant eyeball of a monster. This horrified Chev, and as the giant monster prepared to swallow their base whole, Chev asked out loud if Palm really used them as bait. They were able to jump off the base before the monster could put it all in his mouth. Palm watched on. He thought to himself that Chev and his comrades are very underwhelming, and that they shouldn't have been so kind if they wanted to trick him. As Chev and his party continued to run away from the monster, who gave chase, he continued on. In a gate where over 12 parties that have veteran adventurers fail, anyone would have their guard up when they acted so welcoming to a bait. Moving on, he noted that this giant monster must be the boss of this area. Chev looked back at the monster, saying, against that type of monster, they were at a disadvantage. Max asked if Chev knows what this monster was, and Chev guessed that it was a golden slime, a variant monster you don't normally see in the Maple world, a rare boss monster that only comes out of red gates. He warned his comrades that the body of the golden slime is acidic, and as he was about to tell them the most dangerous part about the monster, the slime decided to demonstrate. It shot a long-range skill called acid shot at Max. Luckily, Chev was able to push Max out of the way of the attack. Terrified and sullied, Max asked what that skill was. After getting their bearing, they all watched as the acid melted the ground. Chev explained that this was what he was trying to warn them about earlier. Golden slimes usually have a long-range skill called acid shot, a skill that lets it shoot out part of its body's acid. Fear gripped Max, and he asked if that wasn't cheating. Chev shouted for him to get a hold of himself, and the golden slime resumed its chase. As they ran, the group asked Chev if he knew of a way to deal with the slime. Chev told them to worry about getting out of here first, as the golden slime's acid shot should have a cooldown of 1 minute. So, he planned for them to use this opportunity to recover and look for a chance to strike. He explained that once they've recovered, they would go for the golden slime's core. Tom saw this as a great opportunity. He suddenly changed directions, heading straight for the golden slime, saying they still have enough time. He jumped at the slime, asking Chev and the others to leave it to him. Chev desperately tried to call him back, saying they have to attack together. But as he said this, Tom was split in half by an acid shot. This scene horrified Chev. He points out that there should still be over 10 seconds left on the acid shot cooldown. The slime activated hacks, and it started spamming the acid shot skill, killing Chev and the others. Palm watched from the cover of a tree. It seemed like it was finally over, and although Chev wasn't wrong about the 1-minute cooldown, he didn't take into account that the golden slime eats items and grows stronger accordingly. Palm guessed that the cooldown timer must have decreased as the golden slime got stronger. He assumed the slime's abnormal size and almost non-existent cooldown on acid shot played a major role in why the previous parties failed. This slime was already in a class of its own. It had grown so much that it could be a fit for a yellow gate, which is 2 levels above red gates. Palm was sure that there weren't any more items left in this dungeon, meaning this mission is a failure. But as he thought this, he recalled Abbas's words. This caused him to smile. Like Batman, he took some prep time, and after getting ready, he shot a fire arrow at the slime from a tree branch. Agitating it, the monster turned and growled at him. But Palm was too confused to take heed. He wondered why the monster's core was unaffected when he aimed directly for it. And if things were going to be like this, he guessed that he needed 4 more shots. But as he said this, the slime started regenerating, so he changed the number from 4 to 5. This prospect put a smile on his face as he got a chance to prove himself to Abbas. The slime started repeatedly shooting its acid shot in all directions, hitting the branch Palm was standing on, but luckily he was able to jump off in time. However, as he fell, the slime started shooting the skill directly at him. Palm quickly threw out a dagger tied to a rope that was wrapped around his torso, and after grabbing hold of the rope, he used the telekinesis ring to impale a tree with the dagger. He knows that to finish off the slime, he needs to hit the exact same spot with 5 fire arrows, and, as he used the rope tied to a dagger to maneuver and dodge the slime's shots. He notes that an ordinary mage would be having a difficult time with the slime, but he isn't your regular mage. He activated and shot the fire arrow. It was a direct hit, but the slime returned the favor with an acid shot. Palm used the rope to swing away, then he ran around a tree trunk and fired another fire arrow at the slime. This aggravated the slime, and it started spamming again. Palm fled, and the slime gave chase. As this went on, he found an opportunity and hit the slime with a fire arrow. Afterwards, he tried hitting it with another fire arrow, but the slime was able to dodge. Palm acknowledged the slime's speed, however, he still thought it was pointless. He used the telekinesis ring to change the direction of the arrow and hit the slime from the back, exposing its core. Palm jumped in as this was the last shot he needed. However, as he approached, the slime lifted its hands, preparing to grab him. This brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this recap, then be sure to hit the like button and subscribe while you're down there. Also, don't forget to turn on notifications so you're notified when a video drops.